Hello everyone, welcome to Chess Odyssey. In today's videos we will learn how to checkmate with the bishop and knight versus a lone king. Despite there being several videos that teach you how to do this, none of those videos teach you how to learn this checkmate and embed it into your long-term memory. Now if you know anything about this type of checkmate, you'll know that it's tough and that even grandmasters have failed to do it properly. And even a former women's world champion failed to do it despite having plenty of time on her clock. For many positions, of course with the exception of positions where the king can fork the bishop and knight and win one of those pieces, the lone king can be checkmated within 33 moves. We will start with such a position because that's the best one that the lone king can start with. If this is your first attempt at learning this checkmate, you'll need to learn the steps to achieving that checkmate. So step 1 will be to occupy the center of the board with your king. Step 2 will be to force the king to the edge of the board. Those steps are going to be easy for any player other than an absolute beginner. The final step, and the one we will focus on, is to bring the lone king to the same corner square as your bishop. In our position, that's going to be the A8 and H1 squares. In this video, we will go for A8. Those are the only places where we can force the checkmate. This third step is where players fail to force the checkmate, and I will present a different method of learning. Some players will know the technique for getting the checkmate, but only if the lone king plays the best moves. So if you are defending with the lone king, my recommendation is to not necessarily play the best moves in every position, because by doing so you can sometimes confuse your opponent. In the early stages of this checkmate, there will be multiple correct moves. Okay, let's get started. Bishop a4, king c7, king a7, king d6, king b6, king d5, bishop c6 check, king d6, knight f3, king e6, king c5, king f5, king d5, king f4, knight d4, king e3, bishop d7, king d3, bishop f5 check, king c3, king c5, king b2, king b4, king a2, king c3, king a1. Okay, so this is where the real game begins. Effective learning involves breaking the material down into parts. So in this first video, we will look at the best defenses by the black king. So here, what we're going to be trying to do is we're going to be trying to force this black king all the way to a8. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to start covering these squares one by one. At least that's the general rule until the king has nowhere to go except a8. So the first move would be to cover the a1 square. We can't do that with the king, at least not in this kind of position. And we can't do that with the bishop because it's a light square bishop. So we have to do that with the knight. And as you can see, we have two ways of doing it. One is to play knight b3 and one is to play knight c2. So we obviously don't want to play knight c2 because that's going to block our bishop and allow the king to run in this other direction. So we're going to play, and here black is going to play king a2, the only move. So here our next step is to cover the next square, which will be the a2 square. And obviously we're going to be doing that with the bishop because if we use the knight, we play, let's say, knight c1, the king can run to a1 again. So the way we do that with the bishop is that we have to waste the move because in this position black only has one move to move the king to a3, and after that happens we'll be able to play bishop b1. So we're going to waste the move with the bishop. There's a couple ways of doing it, but let's just go with bishop h7, king a3, and then bishop b1. So this part so far is pretty simple. We've got two squares under our control and we're moving forward. So here black has only one move, and that's king a4. Now, one thing that you have to recognize is that if we go back one move, in this position we can see that the black king and the white king are one squared apart. They're matching each other. When the kings no longer match each other, that's kind of where the moves get a little bit more complicated. So I've devised a mnemonic for you to remember the moves more easily. So in this position, we can see that the best move for the black king is probably going to be to escape to b5. So the mnemonic is noble king's knight. The noble stands for knight, the king stands for king, and the knight stands for knight. So in other words, if black plays the best moves for the next 3 turns he gets, then we're going to be moving the knight, and then after that we're going to be moving the king, and then after that we're going to be moving the knight. So the first move is going to be the knight. So noble standing for knight, we're going to move our knight. And this is kind of relatively easy to remember also because we're covering the escape square. The b5 square in this position is now covered, so the black king can't move there. So in this position, the best move is going to be to continue to run further up the board. So king a5 is the best move here. So now we know that the next part of the mnemonic is the king. So it's noble, king's knight, and we're at king. So we're going to move the king, and it's pretty easy to remember. We're just moving in the same direction as the black's king. So we're just going to move one square up. So that's pretty straightforward. And then at this point, the black king gets a chance to actually get off the edge of the board by playing king b6. So that's going to be the best move to get off the edge of the board. And in this position, it might look pretty scary because the black king, it looks like he's going to be able to escape and run to the other side of the board, but we can stop him. And we know the mnemonic is noble king's knight. So we played the knight move, the king move, and now we're at the third move, which is the knight move. And here, an easy way to remember it is that you're going to be putting your knight between the two kings. So that's just something that you have to remember, is you just put the knight between the kings. So it's going to be knight b5. And so that's how we get to this position. And when we're in this position, we are going to proceed with a new mnemonic. And that new mnemonic is board beyond belief, and that's going to be 3b. So we know the next 3 moves for white are going to be 3 bishop moves, assuming black plays the best moves. So the best move in this position is demonstrated by the green highlighted square, b7. So if black plays b7, we know we're going to be moving the bishop. But if we look at this position, we can see some of the squares that the king and knight control. And we can see that there's some holes here. And the black king is essentially trying to escape through c8 or c6. So we can actually cover those squares very effectively with our bishop. So the move here is going to be, we are going to control the escape square that's furthest from our king. So it's going to be that escape square. So that's pretty easy to remember. And then the king will attempt to run through the middle. But here we know we're going to be playing another bishop move. And it's kind of easy to remember the 2 bishop moves we play here. We're just going to move our bishop 1 square closer each time. So bishop e6, king b6, and then bishop d7. So those moves are pretty easy to remember. If we go back, we know the mnemonic is board beyond belief, and it's 3 bishop moves. And if we look at it from this position, it's pretty easy to remember. You move the bishop to control the square that's farthest, the escape square that's furthest from our king, and then we move our bishop 1 square closer each time, assuming that black plays the best moves. So, okay. And in this position, black is going to play king a5. so attempting to go in the other direction. And this is kind of an important position to talk about and to remember, because in this position there's actually two methods for checkmating the black king. And actually the method that's a lot easier to remember is only one move slow in terms of delivering the checkmate. So for all practical purposes, if you know the slow method, and it's not really a slow method if it's only, one move too slow, because you're not going to be in very many positions where you're checkmating on the 51st move, and therefore it's a draw because you didn't checkmate within the 50 moves. So what I'm going to show here is I'm going to show you the slow method, and if you know the slow method, then you'll be able to recognize when you are in this position. And if you happen to be in a position where you have to checkmate, one move faster, then you can play the fast method. But the slow method is actually very easy to remember, at least compared to the fastest method. So here we're going to play King c5. The faster method involves playing Knight d4, but so we're going to be playing the King c5 method here first. And this is an important position to remember, because in this position the black king is completely trapped. So all we have to do is maneuver this bishop to control either this square or this square, and the black king can't escape. So for example, if you imagine this bishop being on this square and controlling these squares, the knight controlling these squares, and the king controlling the other squares, in this position the black king can just move between these three squares and can't go anywhere else. So let's look at how this works. So let's say King a4, which is the best move. We can just play Bishop e6. The black king can't go anywhere, so everything is covered. And so King a5, only move. And what we do in this position is pretty straightforward. So we know where our goal is to drive the black king to a8. So we just have to cover the escape square with the bishop. So bishop b3. Only move for the black king is a6. Now we know when the black king moves away from matching the white king. So if we go back here, the black king and the white king are on the same rank, and they're only one square apart. When they're no longer matching, we always are going to control the escape square. So knight d6, pretty straightforward. And then if the black king goes the other way, this is a position we need to know very well. It shouldn't be too difficult to remember, but when we have the opportunity to fork the black king and the white king, and you're not really forking them, it's just a way of thinking about this, then you want to do so, especially when the escape square is already controlled by the bishop. Because what happens is, after you fork the two kings, the king has to go up, and your king goes up to match the king. So that's another general rule, is when you have the opportunity to match the kings, you want to match the kings. And here we can see that the black king can only go in the other direction. The knight actually covers the a5 square pretty effectively. And so black is going to play king a7, king c7, king a6. We know how this method works. We're just going to cover that escape square here with the bishop. So we're going to play bishop c4, king a7, bishop f1. We're just wasting a move. Black is going to play the only move, king a8. And here the move is pretty intuitive, king d6. We're just kind of covering the squares. And black is left only with two squares. And what you need to remember here is when you're in this kind of position where black has two squares, is that you're going to check on the square that's next to the corner. So you're going to check on the B8 or A7 square, and here it's going to be the A7 square. So when the king is on one of these two squares, and the way our king is positioned here, the black king can't be on B8, so we're going to be checking the black king when he's on that square next to the corner. So knight C8, and you're going to be checking with the knight going to the edge of the board like this. So that's kind of another way of remembering it. The black king has no choice but to go into the corner, and that's where we deliver the checkmate. So that's how we deliver the checkmate, and now let's go back and let's look at the best method that white can use. And this method is a little harder to learn, but you know, it's important to know that in this position, if you use the slow method, you're going to be fine. You know, for all practical purposes, you're going to be fine unless you happen to be in that specific position where you need to checkmate one move faster, which is almost never going to happen. But if you do need to checkmate one move faster, then the move you need to know is knight d4. Now, if this is not the only knight move that does the checkmate one move faster, but this is one of them. And let's look at how this will play out. So here, the best move is king b6. And the concept here you have to know is basically building a wall for on the c file so that the black king can't escape. So right now we have the king controlling some squares, we have the bishop controlling some squares, and the only escape square is on c7. So we just play the knight to cover that square, and then we can see that everything is covered, and there's no going to the other side of the board through those squares. So the black king tries to go the other direction, king a5. Here we have to remember that when we have the opportunity to match the black king or to face the black king, that we should do so. King c5, only move is king a6. So we know that when the black king is no longer facing the white king, we have to control the escape square with the knight, and that's going to mean that we're going to play knight d8, king a5, and this is a position we'll see from time to time. The general rule is that when you have the opportunity to fork your and your opponent's king, it is the correct move. So we saw this before. We're going to fork the two kings, king a6, and we know in this position we just have to move the king because the black king cannot go in the other direction because of the knight covering the a5 square. So king c6. So this is an important relationship between the king and knight that you have to always remember, because this is going to be key. King a7, and here a lot of the moves that we're going to be playing are just going to be common sense. So we're just going to cover the escape square here with the knight c5, knight b8, king b6, and we know we're going to be checking the black king on one of those two squares that's next to the corner square. So king a8, so we cannot play knight a6 in this position because that would be stalemate. So we just have to waste the move here. Bishop e6, king b8, knight a6, king a8, and bishop d5 checkmate.